Guess who's back after a little bit of a break. Today I'm going to be running through every book I read this year so far. So I set myself the goal of reading 40 books in 2023 with the hopes, okay, that I will overachieve. I am that person. I'm very competitive. I always want to beat the goal, beat what the goal I've set myself. 40 I thought was like a humble amount of books to read, but I really wanted to get to 52. Now I am behind on my reading goal. I track all my books on Goodreads. If you want to follow me on Goodreads, you can. I will link my profile down below and you can follow along all the books I read. Today I'm going to be running through all the books I've read. I'm going to mostly be speaking about my 5-star books, so the best books I've read, and then we'll do a quick fire on all the other books that I have read this year that are like 3, 4-star and maybe even below. I have read a few non-fiction books that are more so research purposes for like a project that I'm working on, so I'm not going to include them just because it's kind of boring. It's all on the same topic, so you know what I mean. But stay tuned because I am reviewing a book that I'm pretty sure one of the characters is based on me. And I know how insanely narcissistic that sounds, but I have my reasons. So you're gonna wanna stay tuned for that. All the books I'm gonna be giving reviews that are non-spoiler reviews because what's the point, you know what I mean? If any of these books you want like a more in-depth review on where like we talk about spoilers, whatever else, just let me know in the comments below. And I'm gonna have all the chapters lined out in the video of like timestamps of what book I speak about where, so you can skip through as well yourself if like some books you might not have any interest in. But let's get going, starting off with my 5-star books of 2023. The Secret History. This book has been, I mean, it's a really famous book, right? It's written by Donna Tartt. I believe it was published in the 90s, yeah, 1992. It is a really well-known book, but I think it has gotten a resurgence recently on TikTok. And I didn't pay much attention to it until I did Keegan Moncrief's podcast, and she said to me like, oh my god, have you read this book? Because I mentioned that I studied classics, and I told her no, but I'd heard of it and I'd been thinking about it, and she was like, you have to read it. So I got it on Kindle. I read the first half of the book on a flight to New York in February. That is how hooked I was. I was hooked on this book from the first page. I kid you not. I like it so much, I went ahead and bought a physical copy. I am a Kindle girl, I love my Kindle, but what I do is I will buy books on Kindle, read them, and then if I want to add them to my collection, I will do so. I also do buy a lot of physical books as well. In fact, I have too many books to fit on my bookshelf, so that's why I try and buy on Kindle, you know what I'm saying? The basic premise of this book, again, no spoilers, is that we follow Richard Papin, who is a new student at a college, and the college is on the east coast of America. I can't even remember the state. Is it like New England or somewhere like that? I'm very bad at remembering like really minute details of books, which is why I've started to categorize and like try and write down my feelings about a book afterwards, because I can just blast through them and not remember much. He basically becomes very obsessed with the kids in this Greek class. He joins the Greek class, and from the get-go, from page number like 2, I believe, you know a murder is gonna happen in this book. And it's not a murder mystery, it's really not. So like if you're not into, I wouldn't really be drawn to like murder mystery novels or anything like that. This book just absolutely swallowed me up whole. The world that it builds around this university, the intrigue it brings around the characters, you basically see the whole world through Richard's eyes, and he is someone who very much romanticizes possibly very toxic traits in people. He romanticizes his own involvement in, you know, this kind of group of very narcissistic or strange people. You know, you can read it multiple ways. You can read it just through his eyes and be like, oh my god, what an amazing story, or you can kind of dig a little deeper. It is incredible. It really is. If you liked, it kind of reminded me of The Great Gatsby at times, like the way it was written. So much so that it took me a long time to figure out this book is set in the 80s. I thought it was set in like the 30s, I swear to God. But I think that's like also purposeful because Richard is very much like, as I said, romanticizes the people, the other characters in the book, and he romanticizes, it has this very like romantic aura about it. The way he speaks about people, the way he sees them, he only sees like very admirable things in people. This book also creates a world of mystique because you do get the feeling that so much happens when Richard isn't there. Like, there's a lot of mystery that also goes unsolved, which I find really interesting. It's a very character-led book. That's my kind of novel. I don't really care about a lot of action happening. I'm more like, even in my movies that I like a character-led, dialogue-led. It's beautifully written, like stunningly written. You probably have heard loads of quotes of it on TikTok. Like, is there such a thing as the fatal flaw? That's my Donna Tartt impersonation. So it's obviously a chunky girl. I think it's like 620 pages, but I flew through it. I ate this up with no crumbs and I gave it 5 stars. It will make you want to go study classics in an old money school. As someone who studied classics in Ireland's version of this university, it brought me back a lot, because I also felt like Richard at times, where like everyone in my class of classics was so much more knowledgeable than I was. Like, I was very much out of my depth in that part of my degree, but I still had this hunger to learn about it. So I did relate to him in that way. I never really understood the whole term of dark academia till I read this, and now I'm like, oh, dark academia, I gotcha. Next book is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle, Zevin. Oh my god, so this book is super hyped. It won Goodreads Book of 2022. I actually bought this for my friend Devin for his birthday, and I bought myself a copy because I loved how it sounded. And this copy is stunning. Like, you get like all these like metallic details and like rainbow inside. It's gorgeous. It's a really beautiful book. Because it was so hyped, I didn't know, I tried to go in without expectations, but I kind of was like, okay, I think I'm gonna really like this book. The basic premise of the book is about 3 friends. Again, this is the kind of books that I like, but it's about 3 friends, and you follow them through college. They go to college for computer gaming programming, and you follow them all throughout, not all throughout their life, but pretty much all throughout their life, and they end up becoming very successful and rich, and you see the implications of that on their friendship. It is beautifully written. The characters are, they're all like likable and unlikable in their own regard, which I think is always a really admirable thing for a writer to do. You get, this kind of book isn't like The Secret History, in that it's all from one person's point of view. This is from mostly 2 characters' point of view. It's very nostalgic if you came of age around the time that I did. So if you were a teenager or a child in the 90s or a teenager in the early 2000s, this will have a soft spot in your heart, I feel, but anyone can read it. Likewise, if you like video games, this book, it speaks about gaming in a way that I've never read a book about gaming before, to be honest, but the way that they speak about gaming is very much from a gamer's perspective. You can tell how, like, why people are drawn to gaming, the types of people that are drawn to gaming, how gaming can bring people together, how it is a social activity. So I really enjoyed that, because I think so often gaming can be represented as a very negative, insular thing that like people do who don't make friends, and that if you game, you don't have friends. The book reads like a movie, and I do think that the rights have been sold to be a movie, which I would be really, really interested in watching. I think it could be done really, really well by the right director with the right cast, and if they do stay true to the book. But it reads like a movie. It's very visual. As I said, the characters are incredible. They're like nerdy characters, and you just want to be their friend. It's weird. I got very attached to the characters in this book. It was one of those books that when I finished the book, I was sad. You know, I missed them. I miss the people in this book. This book, I was not expecting to cry. Bawled awkwardly in the bed beside Evan. He was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, like, it was so emotional. Oh, it's like feel good, but it also just like highlights the complexities of friendships, especially with like business getting involved in your friendship, money getting involved in your friendship. Also co-ed friendships, so like especially straight ones, so like a straight guy and a straight girl being friends, how like there can be complexities within that too, which I thought it was done really delicately and amazingly. This was such a good book. I loved it. This was a wild card 5-star book. It is This Side of Brightness, and it's by McCann. I was in my mom's house. I think I had just finished one of those 2 books. I think it might have been The Secret History. and I saw this on the table and I was like, oh, what are you reading? My mom's a big reader too, and her and I have always kind of bonded, I guess, over like our love of reading, and we've always read together, and she has very good taste in books, so I always trust her taste. And she just described to me as like, oh, she's like, oh, this book is, she goes, it's really dark. So immediately I was into it. She said it's set in New York, and it's set between the 90s in New York and set between the turn of the 20th century. And I was like, okay, I'll read it. Sometimes you do have to take a wild card book suggestion that you wouldn't really be drawn to. I loved this book. I ate it up. It is so incredibly researched. The historical aspects of this, where you could tell that he was pulling from actual history, which apparently Colin McCann is known to do. He is, I believe, an Irish author, but he lives in New York, I think, and he's known to be very like historically accurate in his writing. If you're into the history of maybe like the 90s in New York, and then also that turn of the century in New York, of how like New York was built and like by who, and the you know, the upsurge of immigrants that came into the city, it's so amazing. It was heartbreaking. I cried many times during this book. I was so attached to the characters, so incredibly attached, and it is basically two interlacing stories that you then find out have a connection, which you pretty much know from the get-go. And you know, they're connected through New York, they're connected through all these different kind of aspects, and it talks about race, it talks about, as I said, immigrants, immigration, it talks about class and intergenerational trauma in such a nuanced and gentle way. Like, there's a lot left here for the reader to piece together. And I think that that was done so incredibly. It doesn't like, it's not trying to force a narrative to you, but you very much get what the author is trying to tell you. It was beautiful, beautifully written, incredible characters, very unusual story, like not one, as I said, that I would usually be drawn to, but this book I gave 5 stars. I loved it, I really did. Final book that I gave 5 stars to, I don't have the copy, I gave it to Evan's mom as a loan, and I actually haven't asked her if she's read it yet, but it was amazing. Now, I have done an Instagram reel on it, so I'm not going to go too in depth on it, but it was Jonathan Franzen's Crossroads. I'm a huge Jonathan Franzen fan. His book Freedom was one of my all-time favorite novels of all time. It's genuinely incredible. He is a very character-based writer. It's really an inner monologue of someone's thoughts. Not much action happens in the books, which I think can scare people off sometimes, but that again is just they're the type of movies and the type of books that I enjoy. And Crossroads is based in the 70s. It is the first of what's going to be a trilogy of his novels, and it follows, in this book, it follows one family, but the whole trilogy apparently is going to follow like a family tree, and it's amazing. I can't recommend it enough. It's a huge book. Again, I think it's about 600 pages, which usually I'm not really into. Like, if I'm honest, most books, unless it's like genuinely going to be 5 stars, I think most books can do a pretty good job in 350 pages or less. It touches on the coming of age in the 70s. It touches on like different generational perspectives. All of his characters are always quite like equally unlikable and likable. Like, you will often hate one character or really like a character, and then the next chapter you get it from the other character's perspective and you're like, oh my god, they're actually a dickhead. It's really, that's what I love. I heard someone on TikTok talk about it and say it's literature with a capital L, and I do agree with that. They're quite densely written. It's not like an easy holiday read, but it is a page turner. Like, I was like, I want to know what's going to happen in this book. And I do find with his books, because every chapter is written from a different perspective, you will read one chapter and then be like, oh, I can't wait to catch up with my other character, you know? So yeah, I'd really recommend Crossroads, but if you haven't ever read any of his books before, I would really recommend Freedom. I loved Freedom. It holds a very close place in my heart, and yeah, it's an amazing book. And the last book that I gave 5 stars to, I actually read on my Kindle. I'm not reading it now. I'm currently reading Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn, which I've never read before, weirdly. Loving it so far. I read on my Kindle, and it was Annabelle by Lisa Taddeo. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. I had this book recommended to me lots. I had seen it recommended lots on Book Talk and all the rest, Bookstagram, that's it. When I picked up the book first, the quote by like a reviewer on the cover was about the main character, Judy. Editing Jenny here, I'm so sorry. Her name isn't Judy, it's Joan. I knew it the second I heard myself say that.
Anyway, if I say Judy, I mean Joan.
And it said like, oh, like Judy's a character I'll be thinking about for a long time. And honestly, same. Like same. I want an 8-part series on Judy's life, because the way that Lisa Taddeo trickled through her life story throughout the novel without making it like really slow, I loved. It follows her. It's when she just moves to California, you know she's there to find someone, but you don't know why, and the narrative slowly plays out and you slowly get an insight into her life and what happened. You know from the start that both of her parents are dead, but you don't know how. But you know that all of these things kind of impacted her throughout her whole life and made her who she is. It's amazing. It was such a great read, real compulsive read. Like, it was one that I really didn't want to put down, and I definitely like stayed up too late reading a lot. It had been described as the American Psycho for women, which now I totally understand why it got that title, and it is very much like that. It is female rage in a book. That's what I'll say. It is female rage and the female experience. It's funny, it's witty, it's dark as hell, and I will say, content warning for pretty much any form of content. Like, I don't want to say what it is because it will definitely give away a lot of aspects of the book that you only find out through reading it. But if you are sensitive around, maybe, shall I say, any topics around the female experience, tread lightly, because there is a lot of heavy stuff in this book. My only critique of Animal would be that because it jumps through timelines, I did find some parts to be quite hard to follow, or like to wrap my head around where I was, like, because it kind of just went straight in some chapters of like, you're here and then you don't know, is this 5 years ago, is this now, is this when she was a teenager? It didn't really make it specifically clear in some chapters, and I'm usually pretty good at that because a lot of books that I do enjoy have that kind of jumpy timeline. But yeah, there was parts of it where like she'd mention a character by name and I'd be like, who's that? You know? So I think that was more like her editor should have maybe noticed some of those things. But other than that, I gave it 5 stars, so I obviously loved it. So these are the books that I gave between 3 and 4 stars that I loved and that I have physical copies of. I read the rest of them on Kindle, and I'll maybe run through them really quickly, but these ones I'll give a little bit more in-depth review on. First up, Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco. Mellors, again, huge one on Book Talk. This one I would recommend if you loved normal people. It gives me that kind of vibe. It is a romantic novel, like about a love story, but it's dark and not a rom-com or a chick lit really or anything like that. It is about kind of an older-ish guy, like not super old, and a pretty young girl who's like, I think meant to be maybe 19, 20, who meet and get married really fast, and you follow their marriage, you follow their inner monologue. They're both quite like unlikable characters again, that unfold to be probably even more unlikable as you read the book. But again, yeah, if you like, it has lots of New York nostalgia in it too. It's set in like the early 2000s in New York City. If you love normal people, you will really like this book, I do think, and you'll fly through it too. It's not super heavy. It is dark, but it's not like super heavy. The writing in it is it's very easy to read. I've seen some people call it cringe, but I enjoyed it. Sometimes I read a lot of really dark stuff like Animal. So like after Animal, I need a book like this, you know? So you need to balance it out. And it had just the amount of like mentally ill characters to make it palatable, but then just the right amount of fun romantic stuff to make it a page turner. Speaking of dark, then I have Where I End by Sophie White. Sophie White is an Irish author, and loads of people recommended this when I asked for their favorite book of last year, and I posted on my Instagram, and she replied to my story and said, I wrote that book, would you like a copy? And I said, absolutely. So this is a fucked up novel. This is fucked up. This is about as fucked up as you can get, okay? And I mean that in a good way. That's a compliment coming from me. It follows a girl who lives on a very remote island in Ireland, off the coast of Ireland, and she is the caretaker, one of the primary caretakers of her mother, and her mother is basically a monster. Here's a quote on the back: my mother at night, my mother creaks, the house creaks along with her. It's terrifying, to the point where I'm like, Sophie, babes, are you okay? Like the shit that's written in here, I'm like, how did your mind even go there? But like, fair play, because an incredible horror book. It's not too long. I think, yeah, it's only 200 pages. You'll fly through it. I meant to bring this to New York. I only had like 50 pages left and I forgot it. Raging, but that was what made me read The Secret History, so you know, it all worked out in the end. I gave this book 4 stars. Another mentally ill female lead, okay? I have a type. Boy parts. This as well, American Psycho for women. Also very akin to My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. Is that how you pronounce her second name? Very like that. The character reminded me very much of that. This is a huge book. A lot of people have read it when I posted that I was reading it. A lot of people replied to my story. It's, again, very unlikable female lead with major mental illness. Look, again, I can't help. I have a type, okay? I have a type. My protagonist type is mentally ill. And it's funny, like really laugh out loud funny in parts. It's the character, you just want to know her story, and the twist that it took, like it's not like a major twist in the book, I'm not really into that, but the twist of the storyline in this, I was not expecting, and I really liked it. Again, very easy to read, you'll fly through it. I believe I gave this 4 stars, and if you liked My Year of Rest and Relaxation, again, this is a good one to read. Okay, this was a really hyped book that I didn't love and I really wanted to love. This is Claire Keegan's Small Things Like These. I bought it in, what's it, Debray Books, yeah, and it was on like the, I don't know, bestseller or something like that list, or like highlighted book, and I read the blurb of the highlight and they're all saying it's incredible, and it is really good, don't get me wrong. I did really enjoy it. I just felt, I don't know, I think it was so short. I wasn't completely bought into the story, and that's not to say that you can't do that in a short novel. You can 100%. I've read plenty of novels that are like under 200 pages where I'm, oh my god, I'm like stuck to it. It has an incredible like note on the mother and baby homes, which I thought was really well done. I think if maybe you're from more rural Ireland, this might mean a little bit more to you, because it is very that like rural Irish mentality. I mean, it won Book of the Year from the Times, the New Statesman, the Irish Times, the Independent. Like, it's a really well-liked book. I might have to reread it because I don't know what it was. I didn't click with it. I did enjoy it. I gave it 3.5 stars, but I was expecting 5. And I think that was my issue. I went into it with expectations, which I hate to do, you know. Next is a non-fiction. It's a memoir, and it's Come by Rita Therese. I bought this book a long time ago and I didn't read it. I just didn't get around to reading it. And then when I was going through all my bookshelf this year, I was like, you know what, let me read that. Love the color, by the way, love the cover. I do judge a book by its cover, I have to say. Like, as in, if it looks like this, I'm more likely to read it. I can't help it, okay? This is a memoir by Rita Therese. As I said, she was, I believe, I don't think she is anymore, but she was an escort or a sex worker, full service, all different kinds, stripper, bottle girl, and this follows her career. Every chapter is of a different period of her life though, so that would be the one critique I would give, in that, again, it was hard to know what order I was reading things in. It was hard to know at what period in her life was she experiencing this, and I think that she should have maybe made that a bit clearer. I do know that it's based off her actual diaries, so maybe and it does feel like a diary entry that makes you feel very close to her, to Gia, who is the main character. It was really enjoyable though, and I think that there's not enough books like this being written where it's like from the perspective of a sex worker. It's not someone trying to stigmatize sex work more. It isn't someone trying to glamorize sex work. It has a really well balanced level of both glamorizing sex work, not glamorizing, but showing the glamorous side of sex work and showing the horrific side of sex work, because all jobs have their fantastic sides and their horrific sides, let me tell you that. And she does this so well without trying to push anything on anyone. You just live in her shoes, live in her experience, and there's some really good sex tips in here. Like, she gives loads of tips on how like sex workers have sex with their period, all the rest, which I really enjoyed. I was like, it's like Carrie Bradshaw 21st century. I believe I gave it 3.5 stars. So these are my notes on my phone because the rest I read on my Kindle, so I'm gonna run through them. After Dark by Haruki Murakami. Haruki Murakami, I love his books. Norwegian Wood is one of my favorite books. He gets a lot of flack though, especially on Book Talk, because of how he writes his female characters, which have opened my eyes to possibly his female characters not being very well-developed characters, or they're all kind of very interchangeable. Like, they're not very standout characters compared to his male characters, but I love them. I love how he writes in this kind of dream world, and this book is very much like that. There's some parts of the book where like you don't know what's happening and it never follows up, but it gives you that dream-like quality. His books to me are always quite a cozy read, but the characters, again, severely mentally ill, like very usually like highly depressed. So I don't know, again, I like what I like. I'm exposing myself, but that's what I like. So I wouldn't say they're feel-good novels, but I don't read feel-good novels really. If you're into like Japanese culture, if you're into reading about Tokyo, they're all set in Tokyo. I think they paint a really cool picture and they create a very interesting world around the characters. Eleanor, Oliphant is completely fine by Gail. Honeymoon was another book that I read. This one is like, it's very funny. Again, the character, it's all the things that I like. It's a unlikable female lead who has major neuroses. The only thing about this is that I felt it was too long for the story that it told, and I felt that it was very predictable where we were going in the story. And I can't remember how long it was. I think it was close to 400 pages. And to me, like, if you're writing a 400-page novel, it better be fucking good. And this was good, but it could have been cut down a lot, I think. But again, great insight into the mind of someone who has gone through a lot of trauma in their life. It brings up like mummy issues, all those kind of things. So it would be a great holiday read, I would say, if you like dark holiday reads. Honourable mention for some books that I've spoken about before in a longer form that I don't want to harp on and on about. Perfume by Patrick Suskind. This is Kurt and Courtney's favorite book. I read this for my book club, which is on my Patreon, and I really enjoyed it. Again, the best thing about book clubs, and the reason I wanted to start one, is because it makes you read books that you wouldn't necessarily like go to. And I think that like we're all guilty of going into comfort zones, whether it's with movies or books or whatever else, even makeup, you know, all these things. I'm a creature of comfort as a person, so I will always kind of gravitate towards the same kind of book, and this was very different. It is set in, is it 17th or 18th century? I think it's 18th century Paris, and it's about a guy with a heightened sense of smell who becomes a master perfumer. I loved it. I really enjoyed it. Some people in the book club didn't like it, and I think that's even better because you get to see, I love speaking to people about like, just about books, you know, because it's like TV shows, you get such a different perspective, and reading is such a like insular one-on-one activity, but getting to speak to people about the book and their perspective, I really enjoyed that. Again, I've done a reel on this book, so I'll link that below, but this book is written by a good friend of mine. It's A Cigarette Lit Backwards by Teja Hadjic-Vlahovic. Incredible. I loved this book. Was like, it's like coming of age for like a punk kid. If you were an outsider, if you really wanted to be seen as cool as a young kid, or wanted to fit in with groups and maybe did things you weren't proud of in order to fit in, you'll love this book. It's so funny. Teja is such an incredible writer. She's able to write about like quite serious matters, but with a huge sense of humor. Really great book. Now for a book that I just didn't really like. There wasn't that many of them this year, but this one, My Sister the Serial Killer. So many people wrote to me when I posted I was reading this saying they loved it. I just thought it was so bad. Like, it's not bad, it's not poorly written, it's written well. I just couldn't believe the hype. Like, the back of on the back, it's like she won the Women's Prize for Fiction 2019 for this book. Like, it is a multi-award winning book, and I just felt it was so unbelievable. Like, and I don't need, like, a lot of the books that I've mentioned here today, like even like Boy Parts, Animal, like they're quite salacious and crazy storylines that like aren't the everyday, but you can see the character's motive for it. This, I couldn't see the character's motive. The main character, Anna basically follows her sister around and cleans up murders on her behalf. and her sister's like really hot and she's not hot. I don't know, I couldn't buy into it. I tried, I finished it really fast. I think I read it in a day or two. It's not that long. Again, if you want like a holiday read that is like not like your typical holiday read, this could be a good one, but I didn't get the hype over this book. And now, the second book by Sophie White I want to speak about momentarily. This book has a character in it that is based on me. And that sounds so incredibly narcissistic. It sounds like, I mean, how much more narcissistic can you get that you read a book and you're like, this is based on me? It's like in Euphoria when they're like, is this plays about us? This is me reading this book. I need to give a background story. I first met Sophie White at a Patreon event, okay? And before that, she had done a photo shoot with my boyfriend, and she had mentioned to my boyfriend that she really liked my YouTube videos. And I was like, who is this person? Everyone's like, she's a writer. I found her Instagram. She didn't follow me on Instagram, which I was like, oh, okay, but I guess I don't follow a lot of people I watch on YouTube on Instagram. So I followed her, she followed back, and since then, like, she sent me her book. I enjoyed that book. We've messaged, all the rest. I met her at the Patreon event, and the first thing she said to me, oh my God, you're going to think my new book is about you, but I promise you it's not. It's about Call Her Daddy. And I said, oh, okay, fine. She's like, yeah, I'm writing this book. Like, part of the narrative in the book is about these two best friends who have a podcast, and it all falls down. And, you know, I thought of the idea when the whole Call Her Daddy thing happened, but you're going to think it's about you, but I promise you it's not. And I was kind of like, well, I don't really care if it is or not. But then my friend read this book and she was like, have you read Sophie White's new book? And I was like, no, oh, but I know, like, I saw it come out and all. I was like, don't worry, I know, like, I know there's some stuff about like two best friends with a podcast. And she was like, Jenny, I'm pretty sure it's about you. And I was like, no, it's about Call Her Daddy. And she was like, you should read the book and come back to me. Okay, I don't think Sophie was lying. I think a huge part of this, I can see a lot of the Call Her Daddy inspo in. But there are parts in this book, the character Lexi and her friend Amanda, they have experiences that happened myself and my former co-host with It Girls. Like, to the point where it was like, I was reading parts of this to Evan and he was like, oh my God. And honestly, I'm flattered. Like, I don't, like, there's no beef. Like, you have to get inspiration, especially if you're writing a book based in Ireland. You have to get inspiration. I'm sure Call Her Daddy did inspire her at first, and then when the It Girls, you know, It Girls Gate happened in 2021, she was probably like, oh my God, amazing. I'm gonna give the book an overall review now. I just had to get that off my chest, because if I can be in your book, I can speak about it, okay? So this book is about female friendship. It's about Lexi, who is me, to an extent. A lot of Lexi is also very much not me. I'll read the back. It says, Lexi is on top of the world. The podcast she co-hosts with her ride or die bestie is going stratospheric. But with all the fame and success cost them their friendship. Spoiler alert. Then Joanne is another character who just had a baby and she's feeling isolated from her friends because they don't have babies. And then there's Claire, who is just feeling kind of isolated from her friends in general. Overall, I really thought this book was great. I thought it was too big. I never feel a book has to be 500 pages, okay? Unless it is The Secret History, or like, I have to be blown away to say, yes, it should be 500 pages. So for me, it was a little bit too long for like the type of literature it was. It was really well written. It was really funny. The characters, I will say, my only point, and this is nothing to do with like Lexi being like roughly based on me or my experience, I felt like you had no empathy for Lexi's character. If I'm being honest, I felt like for Claire and Joanne, you held a lot of empathy, and I thought that the way there is one character in this book who experiences a mental health crisis, and the way that is written was incredible. Like, I thought that was handled so well. You had so much empathy for the character, and you know, even the whole stuff bringing in like childhood and motherhood and feeling estranged from your friends because of something that's going on in your life. Like the empathy you had for Claire and for Joanne was incredible. I didn't have any empathy for Lexi, and it's not that I didn't have that as in I thought like, oh, she should deserve it. I just felt her character was almost like, dare I say, I hope this isn't like offensive, but I felt like Lexi's character was a little biased, as in I feel like maybe Sophie feels a kind of way, not about me, but about like the influencer world or the type of person that would host a podcast about that. And I felt like her character wasn't very nuanced. I don't know, there was just some stuff about it that I thought was a bit cliche, like that the only thing she cared about was like being hot and all of those kind of things, whereas like if you're gonna kind of talk about like a character playing a character through their job or getting sick of that, like surely they should have a little bit more depth. And her character was the only character I felt like wasn't explored with more depth. Again, that's not because there were parallels to Lexi's life and my life. It was more so I just wasn't rooting for her. I just didn't really care. And it's like when I say about like Jonathan Franzen's books, very different books by the way, not comparing them, but that type of, it's written in the same way as in like one chapter is by one person's point of view and then you go on and on and on and you get the other character's point of view. I wasn't looking forward to Lexi's chapters. Like technically I should have been invested in Lexi's storyline the most because it had parallels to my own life. But as the book went on, I just didn't really care. But I did care about the other two characters. I wish I got a little bit more Joanne, personally, because I thought that wasn't maybe fleshed out as much as it could have been, but I think that she still served a really good purpose in the book. And yeah, it's that would be a really good holiday read. This would be a very good book by the beach, by the pool, fun, Irish based, and yeah, maybe some nostalgia for when my life went to shit. So as I said, I read 21 books this year. That obviously isn't all of them, but it's the majority of them. If you want to know all of the books that I've read, you can go and look at my Goodreads. As I said, some of them were just non-fiction, so like we're not really going to go there because snooze fest, you know what I mean? But let me know if you like these kind of videos. I hope you do. I know a lot of you people out there love reading as much as I do. If you want to join my book club, that's over on Patreon, and obviously I've got my podcast there too. If you want to join that, why not? But yeah, I'll talk to you all maybe soon. Who knows? I'm not promising anything. Bye.